Hey everybody, my name's Danny. This is Planet Zoo. I've been playing it for the past couple days. When I first started playing, I had a bit of an issue creating my own exhibits, and it reminded me of the game by the same developer, Planet Coaster. I had an issue making my park, and that kind of drove me away from the game. As far as exhibits go in this game, I've kind of powered through and have decided to just kind of learn how to do it on my own. Granted, the way I do it might not be the best way, but I just kind of wanted to teach some other people who might have the same creative issues the way I do it, so maybe they can become inspired. Today I'll be making a black bear exhibit, just a pretty basic one, nothing fancy. I'm going to be using concrete barriers. Also, I should note, I'm in sandbox mode right now. That's when my money and conservation credits are unlimited. Typically I play in franchise mode, but for the sake of this video, that's what I'll be using. Now, when I create exhibits, personally, I like to use concrete, obviously, and one-way glass. In this section you can see you can kind of customize the way your barriers are. You can do full glass. I like one-way. I don't know how much of a difference it makes, but that's what I tend to stick with. I also tend to use the 8-meter wall length. Just tends to be the easiest for me to work with. I know that there are much better ways of doing it. I know there's better ways of making it look good. But for my purposes, for building just a simple exhibit, this is what we'll be using. Something to note about the one-way glass, this goes the same for the glass that you can put, the glass windows that you could put into any barrier, and the one-way glass barrier itself. Being that obviously only one side of it is tinted, it depends on the way you build the barrier, or the direction that you build the barrier, and that will determine on which side the glass will be tinted. Typically when you're building right to left like I've done here, that is when the window will be transparent from the front. So you're always going to want to be kind of building from the outside, so to speak. I typically only use about 2 sides of my exhibit to be, windowed and transparent for guests. You can always add kind of a viewing hut or, viewing gazebo later on that they can go into. But for my purposes right now, we'll just be using a pretty basic exhibit. Again, I'm not going to be making the shape anything too fancy either. This is mostly just to show about how to create the inside and just inspire people to maybe give it a shot themselves without having to worry about how good it looks, because it can come out looking good regardless. So this is going to be our basic exhibit shape. I'm pretty happy with it for now. It might not be big enough for the bears, but we'll see later on. You always want to remember to add a door, obviously, so the keepers can bring your animals in and out, feed them, clean up their poop, whatever it is. So typically, how I start the exhibit after the outside is completed is the terrain. I know that black bears like a lot of soil and forested areas, so I'm going to start with the actual soil first. I'm going to increase the intensity here and the size, obviously. And of course it's important to know that terrain plays a very large part in, most of the animals' welfare. So you're gonna definitely want to keep an eye on that. What doesn't create a large effect is the actual shape of the terrain. That's typically just for your enjoyment. But to make it look a little bit more natural, I'm going to be using the roughen tool in the sculpting section of terrain. I'm going to set the intensity down to about 10%, typically 10 to 20%, and we're just going to paint over. I'm going to leave this area in the front, right by the windows, flat, but I'm just going to paint over most of the exhibit here. I personally feel the, what's it called, the roughen tool is a savior for this game. You know, for me at least, someone who's not particularly good at using map editors or terrain editors in games, a lot of what I make ends up looking like flat grass, and in this case, the roughen tool really helps make it look natural. So that's what we'll be using for that. In the meantime, I did forget the height of the barrier, for bears at least, actually has to be a little bit higher. We're going to put it up to 5. I think it only has to be around 4, but to prevent them from climbing out, you want to make it a little bit higher. Now, when viewing the bear, you'll typically see you know, what kind of environment they live in. Aardvark can also serve as an example since it's right here. Continents, Africa, and you want to pay attention to the biomes, so grasslands and tropical. And we're going to use these to create the tags that we're going to search for our plants for later. Okay, as you can see, we are taking a look at the Zoopedia page for the black bear. Right now we're into the natural habitat section, that'll be the second tab. And we're looking at the continents and the biomes in order to select our tags. So today we'll be using Asia, and I'm going to be making a temperate exhibit, so we'll be using that biome tag. You can also see some of the other habitat requirements here, like the space, temperature, climbing requirement, and so on that I mentioned earlier. Anyway, we're going to go into the nature section here. I already have Asia and temperate selected. And we're just going to be first selecting some of the smaller plants that we're going to be putting around the habitat. I'm probably going to be using rose bushes and these azaleas. You just kind of want to place them, I would say randomly, unless you have a specific plan that you have in mind. I'm just kind of putting them in random spots. You don't need too many. There will be trees after. So we're going to start with that. Just use a couple different sizes. Again, just kind of place them randomly. I know it looks a little silly right now. And we'll just, a couple of the small ones. Alright, so after you have your bushes placed, that's when I typically tend to go to trees. For this specific purpose, we'll be using beech trees. I've already made a black bear exhibit somewhat recently, and I know that beech trees are one of the trees that provides coverage for them. All of the trees, most if not all of the trees, are in 1, 2, and 3 format, this being smallest, medium, and largest. I'm going to start with the large trees. I always start with the largest size of tree, and then I like to just place them and then rotate them once or twice and just kind of randomly place them around your habitat. Again, this is going to look silly now, but towards the end we're hoping it's going to look a little more natural with the rest of the trees around. After the large trees have been placed, I know there are some spaces missing, but we're going to fill them in with the medium size. Again, we're doing the same thing, just kind of fitting them into the places that the large trees would have been too big for. I'm going to go ahead and say that this exhibit is probably not large enough for black bears right now. That can be fixed later, but I did just kind of want to show off the basic way of building here. So we've done the medium trees, and now we're just moving on to small trees. Again, I kind of just like to take an overhead look and just kind of fill in the empty spaces. I did mention earlier we're going to be leaving this spot up front open. We're going to be using that for feeding and toys. I typically like to leave some of an open spot up front just so that the guests can, see the animals visibly eating and doing what they need to do. So we have a pretty nice forest going on here. At this step, sometimes I like to get in here with, probably going to do about 20 to 30 intensity with the grass. Again, this is going to be dependent upon each different animal, but I like to just kind of put in a light layer of grass on the dirt in the forest, just so that it meets the requirements that the bears need in case they don't have enough of a specified terrain, and B, so you don't just have one huge ugly grass patch or one big ugly stone patch or whatever you'll be using. Again, we're speaking in hypotheticals, so we'll say hypothetically this is enough for the bear for now. At the front here, we'll be using our, habitat. We'll be using our food and water. Something to note about enrichment items and feeding animals. I had this issue pretty early on and was a little bit confused. So when feeding animals, you have these basic options: food bowls, water bowls, trays. We're going to place a couple of those down for now. But these are what keepers will typically look at and fill for your animals. You also have the enrichment. And so this is a little bit of a separate section. Forgot to say also, you can apply the same tags here with animals. So anything we want to see that is usable for the black bear in this enrichment section, we can apply that tag to. Again, toys, just perfect for being up front so that the guests can see what the animals are doing. But my point with the food and enrichment, when you have food enrichment items, for instance, things like the block of frozen fruit, roller feeders, and what was the other one? The tree forager. These are all objects that the keepers will fill with food. Now, if you have enough of these, there will be enough food in the exhibit that the keeper will not be filling the regular food bowl. This I initially took to mean that the keeper was just not feeding my animals, but since it's inside of the toys, you don't see it, and your animals are being fed. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. The last thing, as far as bears go, they do climb. Or maybe I should have went to this step first, but I'm going to go into my Steam Workshop here. No, I apologize, the habitat. We're going to go to climbable. I've downloaded multiple climbing frames off of the Steam Workshop. I was pretty against using the Steam Workshop when I first started playing this game, and the same can be said about Planet Coaster. But I kind of warmed up to it, being that I don't want to create every single thing myself, and I don't have the creative capacity to. You know, I do like making the exhibits, but I'm not someone who can build a building piece by piece with squares and circles. That's not me. So in that case, the Steam Workshop does really help for things like, these climbing, jungle gym climbing frames for exhibits, and you can kind of just rotate them and make them look different in here, and I just think there's something to be said about using the Steam Workshop pretty liberally. Not that you shouldn't flex your own creative muscles and make your own exhibits and, give it a shot at making your own stuff, but all I'm saying is don't be afraid to use the workshop. The final couple touches I'll just add here is a path snapping along the outside of the barriers. I find this to be an incredibly useful feature. Sometimes around the corners it can look a little silly, but it's nothing you can't brush up later. So as you can see, our black bear is living happily in our exhibit up here in the tree. Guests are coming to see and have a great view. I did end up actually increasing the size of the exhibit a little bit. I'm not sure if I needed to, but I ended up doing it just in case. I also added the bushes that I neglected to add initially, these rose bushes. Any other tips to go over before the end here is you want to make sure that you obviously have shelter for your animals. I will again vouch for the Steam Workshop in saying that unless you can make one, these natural shelters, rock shelters, look really nice for bears, forested areas, and the like. In closing, I hope I helped some of you guys kind of, I don't know, face your fears in a way when it comes to creating and plan a zoo. I know it can be kind of daunting with how much is available at times, but I think even creating just your own exhibits can be a really fulfilling and rewarding experience. So that'll be it for me this time, and look forward to making the next video. I'll see you guys next time, and I hope you have a good night.